going back to our Staplet, applet, let's look at a couple of other comparisons here. We're going to look at the side-by-side bar as a relative frequency graph and as a frequency graph. So notice, take a look at this, the bars, and of course this is on your notes too. There's the relative frequency, and here's the frequency. They look very different. So it's really important to understand which one you're looking at when you make comparisons. So what specifically do we notice about the different graphs? We can see the bars are very different heights. So here with relative frequency, obviously with relative frequency here, we're dealing with percents. With frequency, we're dealing with the counts. So this tells us this actually tells us how many people are in each travel class. So this is a helpful piece of information. Number of people in each travel class. So if we're wanting to compare numbers of people in each class and how many died, so the number who lived and died in each class, this graph would probably be more helpful. This tells this graph, though, over here is more useful for comparison purposes because it tells us percentage. Because when we look here, it looks like there's not a whole lot of difference between, if we were specifically looking at the number of people who died in each class, there's not a lot of difference. Or sorry, the number of people who lived in each class, not a lot of difference. Until we look, of course, at the number of people who died in each class when we see a great deal of difference. But it's hard to make a direct comparison because there's such a big difference in how many people total are in the class. Like here, if we look, it looks like there's about a little over 500 total people in first class, but in staff, there's like 1,100 people total in staff. So there's just so many more people in staff that it's hard to make a good comparison. So I'm going to write, this is better for comparing survival rates. So this tells us the number who lived and died, but the other one's better for comparing. So something I want you to write down as a really important piece of information is always use relative frequency, in other words, percentages, to compare groups of different sizes. In other words, different frequency or counts. Now, it's not because the frequency graph doesn't give us any important information. It does, but this is better for comparison. Now we're going to look at a type of graph that actually does both of these things well. So if we go back to our chart type here in our applet and look at the Mosaic plot, notice the Mosaic plot. Not only are the bars, are the segments of the bars different, but the widths of the bars are different. So this gives us two pieces of information. So we go back here, and I kind of have this summarized down here. It shows not only the relative frequency of the survival status for each class, it also shows the relative size of each travel class. So this part tells us the size of the group, and so this tells us the size of each travel group, and then the relative frequency, of course, is the percent who lived or died. So it gives us both pieces of information. So if you compare that to the segmented bar graph, it just tells us the percent of each group who lived or died, but we don't have any idea about the relative size of how many are in the class. So here we can see that by the width of this graph, okay, so if I were to kind of take this width and sort of move it over here, which I can do, we can see that there's like twice as many people in the staff and almost twice as many people in third class as there are in first class. Second class is the smallest group. So, oops, I don't know what I just did. Okay, back. I jumped us accidentally to the wrong page there. So here we can see that not only not only that the percentage of the staff who survived is only half that of first class, but also there are about twice as many staff members as there are first class passengers, which explains why the number of survivors for both groups is about the same. Okay, so half the survival rate, but twice the size. So that's why when we looked at this frequency graph up here, we could see that the number who survived is about the same, but the number who died is quite a bit more. So that's the Mosaic plot, also a really useful graph.